This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Rode. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Rebel HR community. Really excited for the conversation today. With us, we have Pavini Moray, PhD. They are the author of the new book, available now, How to Hold Power, a somatic approach to becoming a leader people love and respect. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to meet you. We've been talking about getting this on the schedule for a couple of months now, so I'm excited that we finally got an opportunity to connect.
Me too.
All right, so I think I'm really fascinated to dig into this topic a little bit because it's something that's a little bit new in the world of human resources and in the world of corporate. And that is talking about a somatic approach to leadership. And I'm curious, what motivated you to really dig into this as a topic to focus your energy on around a book?
Yeah. So my background is in somatics. I have been a somatic coach for many years. And then I decided I wanted to start a company. And had never started a company before, had never led people before. And so I started this company and all of a sudden, realized that I had all this power that was really impacting people's lives. And, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to lead well. I mean, I was leading how I would want to be led, right? And was kind of bossing from that angle, and it wasn't working, for my employees. I mean, it was working for some of them, but not for all of them. And I felt at a loss of how to lead in a way that is ethical and in alignment with who I am, but also in a way that would work for the people who are on my team. So there was this process of learning to embody leadership. And somatics, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, what it really means, it comes from the word soma, which is a root word meaning of the body, right? And so it means that the wisdom that is inherently stored in our tissues, in our bones, in our fascia, in our embodied way of living in ourselves has a wisdom to it. And that wisdom is a free resource that we always have available to us. And so as I was in this process of becoming a leader, I was leaning heavily on that, of my own embodiment, my own embodied wisdom, and learning to make sure that my decisions were aligned, that they felt aligned, that I could feel myself in my decision making. And so especially for having to make hard decisions, or where there was conflicting information, really having to lean into my own intuition, and that embodied knowledge. And so that's where the topic of the book came from, was like, oh, this is something that's really applicable and practical for leaders, of how can you live more in your own skin and make decisions that feel really aligned. So that's the kind of the first part of the book. And the second part is from my work in working with relationships, and how can we have relational skills in the workplace that are consensual, that are ethical, that honor everybody's humanity. So that's kind of where this impetus came from. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of those fields or areas that we're just now starting to talk about in the context of workplace and corporations and human resources. And I think we throw around the word, a lot of words like intuition or, empathy, sympathy, these sorts of things. But a lot of this ties into this practice of somatics. And so I'm fascinated to dig into this a little bit more. So for those of us that are maybe new to this type of thinking, but have kind of understand the feeling of like going with your gut, or feeling like, there's some sort of bodily response to whatever's happening in your field, if you will. How can we start to shift our thinking to be a little bit more aware of what our body is telling us, and to tap into some of that wisdom that you mentioned.
Yeah, I love this question. So it's really a lifelong practice, right? I was thinking this morning of how I just spent some time with some really little kids and how embodied they were. That they were, I'm talking like 3, 4 years old, right? And so they are just really following the impulses in their body. They're paying attention to when they feel hungry, when they feel sad, when they need to move, when they want to be snuggled, right? There's all of this attention that is happening inside of them where they're acknowledging their own experience. And none of this is happening on a conscious level, right? But you and me, we went to school and we got socialized and we learned to ignore a lot of that information. And part of that, I'm not saying that that's bad, right? But like part of it is helpful in helping us get along with others. And we can't just do what we want and throw temper tantrums when we're mad. And, we have to be able to play well with others. But there's loss of being able to have that direct access to that information. So in answer to your question, it's really this practice of attention, of starting to bring our attention back to our body, to noticing what's happening in our body at any given moment. And so when I say practice, it's not something like you're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get up and do my embodiment practice from 8 to 8:30, right?
Yeah.
I'm starting to learn to bring my attention back to my body at any moment, right? So how this happened for me is I started to notice that when I would be in meetings with my team, things would be happening in my body, right? And if I could notice them, if I could notice that I was, for example, contracting my pectoral muscles, right? Or if I was clenching my jaw, or if my hands were clenched, that was a piece of information that I could interrogate, that I could say, okay, hey, what's going on here that's making me have this contraction response? What's happening in this meeting that doesn't feel right? And so that practice of bringing the attention back to the body is both, it can be more formal, right? Like, okay, now I will do a body scan, for example. Then it can also be more informal of, oh, I notice I'm walking into this meeting and I'm feeling really tight. I notice I'm not breathing. I wonder why, right? And just in asking ourselves. And the other piece of this is that I want to speak to is that the information your body gives, it's clear, but it's not in language, right? So it's our job to translate what's happening. So if we're feeling that muscle contraction, or if we're feeling that tightness, or if we're feeling that shallow breath, we have to be in there asking ourselves, okay, why is this happening? And what do I need right now? What does my body need right now to feel more relaxed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for me, it's the shoulders, going towards the ears.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have to remind, oh yeah, put those down. All right. But a lot of times it's some level of like tension, or like it's a lot of times it's almost like you're getting ready to go into the ring. Right. And I think a lot of HR professionals probably get that, especially like, here comes that tough conversation. Here comes that frustrated employee. Here comes that manager that just doesn't like what we're doing. We have been trained to shut that off, right? Like flip the switch, put on the HR mask and just kind of plow through it. So with that in mind, the model of leadership that we've been really kind of educated in, is really the opposite of what we're talking about here. So as we think about the what we define as leadership, and the model of leadership, and how to effectively lead, what kind of change do we need to start to think about as it relates to the paradigm of how we define good leadership?
Yeah. The masking that you're talking about, right? It's an armoring, right? It's a decision to not reveal any vulnerability, right? To hold a professionalism And it has benefit, right? So I'm not saying to never do that. That's a skill that people have learned, and there are benefits to that skill. There's also costs to it, right? So what does it cost, when you shut out your intuition? What does it cost when you shut down your feeling self, right? And, I would say that the cost is your own humanity. And when you have shut down your own humanity, when you can't connect with your own feelings and needs, right? It translates and ripples out into a lack of empathy, right? Because you're not being empathetic with yourself, right? And so how can you be empathetic with someone else? How can you, hold what they need and what they're feeling, because you're not holding it for yourself, right? So I think that the reframe here is how to embrace our own humanity first. How do we put our own oxygen masks on first so that we can have empathy? We can be connected with folks who are coming with needs that are challenging for us, right? So when you have that difficult conversation, it's because somebody's coming with feelings and needs that you don't feel like you have the bandwidth or the skill or the resource, or even the emotional space to meet, right? It just feels like an inconvenience, or it feels annoying, or it feels like pressure, or you feel a lack of power, right? And so this reframe on how do I welcome my own humanity? How do I say, actually, that shoulder raise, when your shoulder raising up to your ears, like, what do I need in this moment, right? What do I need to feel safe? What do I need to feel grounded? And then that enables you to be more available to be in those human to human relationships.
Yeah. I don't know that many of us are very good at that. I mean, I've had this conversation multiple times in my personal life where it's, you can't help everybody. Don't be a people pleaser, these sorts of things. And it's but I think the point that was really powerful and, that really resonated with me is, you have to have empathy for yourself if you're going to have empathy for others. And people know, right? Like they know if you're flip a switch and now you're robotic, right? Or you're inauthentic, or, what I call like HR mode, right? Um, and I feel like, I can pinpoint a number of times where it's ended poorly because of that. Like the interaction has ended poorly, or it's been a really rough day because there's all this like negativity built up, or all this tension built up, and it's just never really been addressed or released. So what is the ripple effect if we just don't listen to our bodies, or don't have this somatic awareness? What does that lead to if we don't think differently about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a health cost for sure, that when we aren't paying attention to what our bodies are saying, when we're not tracking our needs, and we are, as you said, pushing it down or pushing through, right? That there is a cumulative cost of stress on your system, because you have been away from yourself. And so that stress, we know what that does, right? It has huge health impacts. It has relational impacts. It has it just has impact on everything. And so I think that that's the cost. And the benefit, of course, is of really coming home to yourself, and of being able to, be honest with yourself about what you are feeling and what you're needing, and, having permission to have that be okay. Like it's like some self-acceptance that what you're feeling, what you're experiencing as a person, is okay for you to be feeling that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's okay to be human, right?
It's okay to be human. Yeah.
It's literally in our job title. We forget about that. Like it's 50% of the job title, right? Human resource. Like this is the first word.
Right.
So I want to shift gears. I want to dig into the subject, or the definition of power. And obviously it's right in the title of the book, How to Hold Power. And I think, what's what struck me about the title is, the word power can have really positive connotation and really negative connotation, and so but it is what we're talking about as it relates to leadership. So, how do you think about the definition of holding power?
Mm-hmm.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
I think about it in terms of impact, right? And I think that that's kind of the classical definition of like the ability to influence others. And I prefer the word impact, and impact being neutral, both positive, negative, or nothing, right? Neutral. But it's really the conversation that we're having all the time. And I think it's like something that most of us are deeply attuned to, are the nuances of power. We're especially attuned to it when we are on the receiving end of someone else's power, right? We can really feel the impact that someone in power, their decisions, their choices has on us. It's harder for us to feel the impact that we have on others. And I think part of this, I would say, epidemic of disembodiment is that when we're not feeling ourselves, we also can't feel our power. We can't feel the impact we're having on others. And although they are deeply aware of it, right? And, but I would say that most of us, we really know, intuitively, very, very clearly, how power moves, even if we can't name it. We feel it. Right? We know when somebody has just done a power move on us that doesn't feel good. Or we know when someone has used power in a way to lift someone else up. We feel it, even if we can't put words to it. Even if we wouldn't say, oh, that's an exchange of power right there. It's in us that we feel it and we recognize it.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. I want to go back to, maybe you made a comment like it's a little woo-woo, right? Like energy. And I have a feeling that some of our listeners, that where this is the first time that they're hearing about, somatic awareness and kind of listening to your body, they might be feeling that way just about that. So, walk us through kind of the actual kind of science behind this, where there is, this isn't just like a totally woo-woo principle.
No, it actually really weaves with neuroscience, right? That the proprioception is the ability to know where your body is in space, right? To feel where your body is in space even without looking. And so it's why when you get pulled over, or if you got pulled over and an officer thought you might have been drinking, they would do a proprioceptive test, right? Can you walk a line? Can you touch your nose with your finger, right? Because alcohol interrupts our ability to be proprioceptive. So interoception is the ability to feel the information that is coming from your nerves on the interior of your body, right? So it's the ability to feel what is happening inside yourself. So where are those contractions? Are you hungry? Do you have to pee? Are you thirsty? Are you warm? Can you feel movement happening inside of you, right? And that could be like physical movement, like with your intestines, or it could be your heart pounding, right? So interoception, which is also more colloquially described as the felt sense, is our ability to put our attention on what's happening inside of our bodies. So that's the science behind this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that makes, that's a really interesting corollary, like a a DUI test, right? Like walking a straight line, which hopefully most of our listeners haven't had the joy of experiencing, but I suppose it might happen.
We have
but
empathy for them if they have.
we do. We have empathy. But like I'm reflecting on, I mean, we get that feeling too, right? Like some level of unsteadiness after certain, interactions
Absolutely.
or a headache at the end of the day, right? It's some stuff like that, like that, that makes a lot of sense, but we're just supposed to, take an ibuprofen and go about your day, or, maybe shake it off and just keep moving. And that, what I'm hearing is that might not be the most effective way to manage. So as we think about going back to power and kind of power being the currency and being something that we need to be aware of, why is it important to figure out and be a little bit more conscious about how you are presenting and how you are kind of holding that power for others around you?
Mm-hmm. I presume that you and your listeners, and I certainly share this, long for an equitable, just world, right? We want a world that where people are in integrity, are aware of their impact, are considerate, are empathetic. Like we long for to be safe, really. I mean, at its basis. And so our capacity for all of those things is deeply rooted in our bodies. And so in order to create that kind of just world, like we really have to be able to feel how we're acting with our power. Like when we do things when we use our power inappropriately, when we use our power over, right? So there's lots of different ways to hold power. One of them is to hold power with someone. One of is a collaborative approach to holding power. One is power over, right? So when we are dominating, we're using power over. One is power under, and this is when we are being like secretive or undermining or cutting, like gossiping, those kinds of things, right? And so where I see the sweet spot for us to be is in this just world that we long for, right? Is to be aware of our own power, right? To really be deeply aware of how much power we have access to, how much agency we have, how much impact we can create, and to see that in others too, and to be in a collaborative relationship of power sharing with others, so that we're not having to use our power to get our way, but we can use our conversational skills. We can use our skills of communication to get what we need, right? So that other people don't become a resource to be utilized or to be used and then thrown away, but rather a resource of when we're sharing power together, right? And you've probably had relationships. I mean, many of us are in primary romantic relationships, and hopefully, when you're in that kind of relationship and you are sharing power, like the force that you have, the impact that you can create is greater than the sum of its parts, right? So, I think that that awareness, developing that awareness, both the body awareness and also how we're using our power, it just really helps us create the world that we want to live in.
Absolutely. I like that. Yeah. And I think, I think that, in the context of our roles as HR professionals or leaders of people or whatever your role is, as you're listening to this podcast, many of us are in those power over paradigms. We have some level of authority that's given to us just by nature of the job that we do, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how we have to show up and present, right? And while we might have this hierarchical power, that doesn't mean that we are making that power dynamic positive, right? You mentioned earlier that power can be kind of neutral, right? But it's up to us to make sure that it doesn't go negative, right? Certainly for people around us, and that reverberates back into us as well, right?
Yeah. I think that there's, especially for folks who are imbued with organizational power or power that's bestowed by a job, it's really on us to make sure that those who are that we are managing or that we're supervising, that our power is a benefit to them, right? So that we're looking out for them, we are um, empowering them as much as we can. We are sharing power. And also, I mean, it's just kind of like the power, for example, of stepping into mentorship, right? Where you're claiming, like, you're not flattening power. You're not saying, oh, we're the same. Like, you're like, no, I have spent years developing my position in my career, right? That gives me, situational power, right? It gives me power based just on my history. And in order to be collaborative with that, like, I can be in mentorship with you. I can lift you up. I can support you. And it's acknowledging that there is actually a power differential. So I'm not suggesting that we, erase power and just everybody's on the same level. Like, that's not true. Right. But it's like, how do we use it in ways that get us the end result that we want? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the it's there's a little bit of common sense there, right? Like, that not everybody's going to be on the exact same playing field, but the word that you used earlier, equity, right? Like, at least we can be equitable. We can be we can show up consistently. We can be empathetic and listen, and ultimately that will help make this a better world and a better workplace for our teams, right?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about listening?
Yeah.
I just think it could be helpful for folks. Yeah.
Sure.
It would be cool if you would be willing to tell me, where do you see your listeners maybe having challenges with the skill set?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have with listening is the fact that we get so much information, and a lot of times the information that comes to us is filtered. So it's not necessarily direct. And so for us a lot of times to really understand exactly what's going on, we have to dig really deep, or we have to go get other information. And the other challenge with listening for us is a lot of times we're the eyes and the ears of our organization. And so, it's our job to really be that connectivity between our employees and leaders, and kind of help make sure that we've got really good 360 communication. And that sounds really, really good and like easy, but that's really, really freaking hard. So I think that's, kind of organizationally, that's one of the bigger challenges that we have with listening in general.
Just the amount of, so what I'm hearing is the amount of information that you're receiving that you have to filter through, that the information is already filtered. So you have to have a process of discernment to figure out, like, what is actually happening here.
Right.
And then that you're actually the glue, you're the bridge between employees and leadership, right? And so both are pulling on your attention, both have demands on you, both want you to be on their side. So there's this sense of loyalty that you have to explore. Yeah.
You got it.
Okay.
You said it better than I did.
I was just listening.
There you go.
Yeah. And so I guess I would ask, and I have some thoughts on this, but, like, what are your practices when it feels like too much?
I think I can't speak for everybody else out there, but I think from my standpoint, my practice is just take every last thing in that I can, to the point that it's almost overwhelming for me, and then try to distill that down into something that's consumable, helpful. Take these really big, like, it's almost like the big data problem where you've got this massive amount, and you're trying to funnel it. And so how do I handle it? I just try to stay as open as possible, to the point that you try to kind of figure out what's actually going on.
Yeah. I mean, it just sounds like massive input is coming
Yeah.
towards you. And your particular strategy is to absorb and to then kind of distill from
Yep.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The other thing I would say too, and this is where there's been a lot of work here, but it's around, data analytics and HR analytics and, how do we, what is the data saying? So, some of that listening is actually kind of metrically driven, right? So it's like, okay, what is our team telling us? What is the data telling us? And the truth is usually somewhere in the middle there, right?
Mm-hmm. And does your gut play a role in that?
Mine does.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can, that's the only way that I can make decisions or share information. And I would say it's part intuition. It's part like 2 decades in the field where it's like, I've seen similar situations. This is what happened in the past. That's likely what's happening now. So it's also kind of this like learned intuition as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Which may or may not be accurate, by the way. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's still an educated guess in many cases.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I think it's it's kind of like the embodiment of what we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like all of the information coming and that you become the filter, you become the processor. And then ultimately what comes from that is something that you've understood in your body, right? That you are taking in from different factions. You're absorbing this information, but then the output of that is processed through your body. Yeah. That's kind of exactly what I'm writing about.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me be nosy and ask you questions about that.
This is good. No, this is good. Yeah. Everybody, that's the Rebel HR podcast. The host is Pavini Moray, PhD. Thank you very much. It's our listeners can probably agree with this. Like, there are so many times where we go into a situation and it's just like something feels off, right? Or like we're in a conversation and it's like we just can't put our finger on it, but something like there's some trigger in the back of our mind is saying, something's a little bit off.
Right.
And then there are other conversations where we're interacting with somebody, we're talking to somebody, and it's like, this is so right? Like this is universally correct. And, and I think, and you can feel that in your body if you really listen. But, I think we could all do a little bit better at being a little bit more aware of that at times, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things there is, that I've noticed is that the more I listen, and name what I'm noticing, greater trust I have in my experience, right? And the greater trust I have in the experience, the more it happens. Like there's this really positive feedback loop that happens when we start listening. And so like, for example, that you gave of like, oh, something doesn't feel right. I'm sitting here, I'm listening to all this, something feels off. I don't know what it is, but something feels off. What happens if you name that? What happens if you say, well, I notice that in my gut, I'm just feeling the sense of something feeling off and I can't tell you what it is, but I know that something doesn't feel right here. Right. And you start to name, what you're noticing. And it doesn't have to be, because it's vulnerable, right? It's vulnerable to say, oh, wow, I noticed that my shoulders are really tight as I'm listening to this conversation. It can be a really vulnerable thing, especially in the face of that professionalism we talked about, to start using your body as a source of reference and wisdom, right? And naming it. But the more even if you don't do it out loud, the more you do it to yourself, it still reinforces it. It still gives you that feedback loop so that you are building that body trust and able to rely on that as a resource more and more. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we touched on, kind of a common thread that we've had here over the last few discussions, the last few weeks is, that vulnerability piece, that authenticity piece. Like, sometimes it's a little bit challenging, but, that's really where that human connection comes into place. Right. And that's with like being aware, being open, being vulnerable. Really, that's the human experience. Right. So, and we should be able to have that in our workplace as well as at home. So with that being said, we're going to shift gears. We're going to go into the Rebel HR Flash Round. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. Question number 1. Where does HR need to rebel?
Well, in what you just said, that we can have more of that human experience at work, not just at home. what I would say is you already are having that human experience at work. It's a myth that we can compartmentalize work and home, right? It's just not possible because we are the same person, whether we're at work or we're at home. Now, can we perform? Can we mask? Can we armor? Absolutely. We can do that. We've talked about the costs and benefits of doing that, but there's something really beautiful to me when I see leaders start to break down that compartmentalization, when they start to say, I don't like how this feels. I don't want to do this. I want us to go in this way because it feels better to me. Or I notice in our relationship, there's some unaddressed tensions and I'd like to talk about them with you. When we start to name these things and we start to claim the space of our humanity at work is super powerful. And I think that kind of leadership is where I would like to see HR heading, right? Is into demanding the full acknowledgement of our humanity wherever we are.
Absolutely. Well said. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
Okay. I think we should be listening to the people who are, have been historically most impacted by messed up power dynamics. So this means really seeking out leaders of color. It means seeking out leaders of who are in any way having a marginalized identity or experience. Leaders who have experienced oppression. So this is queer leaders, trans leaders, Black leaders, Indigenous leaders, Jewish leaders, leaders who really can understand from being in the position of those lived identities of power dynamics. And I find that it often takes more work to seek out those leaders because they are not in the public sphere, right? Like they're not the necessarily the people who are getting the magazine articles or having the awards, right? But when we do seek out those leaders, the wisdom that they can share with us about power and about humanity and about how to have open hearts and how to be whole people is so profound. And so those are the leaders that I follow, are people who are living in those experiences.
Absolutely. And final question, how can our listeners reach out and connect with you?
Sure. Well, you can check out my website, which is pavinimoray.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram. Same name, Pavini Moray.
Absolutely. We will have all of that information in the show notes. The book, once again, How to Hold Power, a somatic approach to becoming a leader people love and respect. Pavini, thank you so much for spending some time with us and just some wonderful content to help us think a little bit differently about how we show up in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.